Hey you guys, welcome to week 3 of class. This week we are discussing cultural awareness and diversity. So let's get started. So before we begin, we want to recognize that is a lot to say when we talk about cultures, understanding diversity, and being a competent cultural helper. The truth is that we'll never be perfectly competent, but the goal is to continue to learn and grow in our experiences because every person is representative of a mixture of cultures and experiences. We are all truly unique, and we all also have a lot of similarities that we can connect to, so it's just important to keep both of those things in mind. You yourself have had a lot of experiences that have shaped you. You also have cultures that you connect to. I'm sure that you have similarities to people in cultures you connect to and dissimilarities. So this is pretty complicated stuff, and just an openness and awareness is the key. So first, just to quickly ask you this, have you ever been the subject of a negative reaction based solely on your membership in a group? So for me, that might be being female. That's a large group. Someone has said to me before, I don't know how I feel about a female having opinions the way that you do or sharing her thoughts. That wasn't super. But what about a positive reaction for the same reason? Privilege. I've probably in some situations been treated better because I was a female. For some reason, right now, the only example of that I can think of is like a ladies' night at a bar. Not that I've been to many of those. But regardless, sometimes we even have parts of ourselves that have gotten negative reactions one place and positive somewhere else. So this is complicated stuff. And why do you think people have negative stereotypes about others? That's something that we'll kind of keep exploring, but start thinking about that. So, another thing to realize is that when we see clients, we are only getting just a little bit of them. We can spend even 10 years with a client and not know everything about them. But generally, people are like icebergs. Most of it's out of sight. We can't really determine a person based on their appearance, yet most of the time stereotypes and our thoughts and beliefs about people are taken from their appearances. It's hard to separate that out of human nature. We're used to kind of analyzing what we see, but really as a helper it's important to realize there's so much more there. So what exactly is diversity when we're talking about it? It refers to all the ways that individuals are unique and differ from one another. Like I said before, there's actually a lot more diversity than there are similarities. However, people also like to identify with one another. So again, we want to appreciate diversity and that people are limitly complex in so many combinations that we'll never be able to understand them all. But people also, we can kind of group them into these groups, which is helpful and not helpful at the same time. So no easy answers here. So when we talk about being a helper and really wanting to become culturally competent and embracing diversity, there are a few different things that can kind of help out in that journey. First is recognizing our unique differences. That can start with your own. In what ways are you different? Have you ever felt different in your life? And in what ways are those differences actually kind of magic? And I think that appreciation can also grow to other people, realizing the people in your life that are different from you. Maybe you can think of people that were different from you in a number of ways, and that was helpful for you. I know that when I had the privilege to go to some countries that were different, I got to go to India and I got to go to Mexico. More so with India, I saw more differences, but in both places, I just learned how beautiful the world is, and it's good that there are differences. I appreciated seeing that there were different ways of thinking about the world and approaching the world. We want to try to be people who can attract people of all backgrounds. What does that really mean? I guess for me, I think that means just being an open, kind person. Kindness works everywhere, and someone who can listen and get to know you is something that most people will appreciate. Recognize how attitudes affect us all. We all have different beliefs and attitudes about the world, and that can really impact the way that we engage with the world. The same will be true of our clients. They will have different attitudes that are going to impact their life. Create an environment where all can succeed. I think that also relates to us talking about justice last week, that we want to create helping atmospheres that work for everyone. and acting to promote diversity. And of course, there are a lot of different ways to do that, which we will discuss more. So elements of diversity. When we're talking about diversity, what are the different ingredients? In your book, they discuss the addressing model. These are just some elements. Some of them are similar and some of them are different, but I think the addressing model is a nice one for remembering. Let me move myself. So age. If we think about it, a person who is 15 sees the world very differently as someone who's 85. As a helper, a counselor who's been doing this for 6 years, I have worked with individuals who are in their 80s, and so they certainly saw the world differently than me. And sometimes I was able to learn a lot from them, but sometimes they were able to learn from me. Difference isn't always a bad thing. Gender, obviously there are different genders. And there are even concepts about, is gender, there's maybe more variation. It is a scientific fact that about 1 in every 100 people are born without a clear gender. We think of the gender binary, but gender obviously is a huge way that we organize culture and society in most places. Ethnicity, kind of where you're from. That's not exactly race. It's, someone who is from Ghana might identify very differently as someone who is a Black American from New York City. But then race. We see race a lot in the news today. Race is not biological. If you look at our DNA, they're all the same. But in terms of, we have created these kind of different racial groups based upon the color of our skin for some reason or other in history, and so that is something that we build cultural meaning upon. Physical ability. This is something that people don't think about a lot, but someone who is deaf or someone who is blind or has any type of physical limitation or difference, or even a disease, like individuals who have cancer, they tend to be really changed as a result of that. So physical ability can be a huge cultural group. Sexual orientation, of course, physical characteristics, income, socioeconomic status has a huge impact on individuals and their opportunities and the way they see the world. Education, you as an educated person have access to a lot of information that is changing you and has changed you from the person you were before you had that education. Marital status, if you have the ability to even be married. Religious beliefs play obviously a huge role, and there are a lot of different religions in the world and a lot of different ways people see the world. Geographic location, as Midwesterners, you guys have a lot of characteristics that are pretty different from maybe people in Louisiana or Georgia or other southern states. As someone who is Midwesterner who spent a lot of time in the South, there are definitely differences. Parental status, whether or not you're a parent, and personality type. So a lot of different things that go into diversity. So obviously we can't know them all, but appreciating and understanding that there are a lot of different factors that make up people. And there are a lot of things that we understand from our own experiences, but there are way more things we'll never fully understand because there are more combinations than we can even fathom. Next, this info is taken from, I think, like 5 or 10 years ago, but nevertheless I thought it was interesting that if you took the Earth's population to a village of just 100 people, the Earth as it is, well, at least 5 years ago, with all of the same kind of ratios the same, this is what it would look like. Mostly Asian, because most of the world is Asian, not white American. 12 Europeans, 14 from the Western Hemisphere, both North and South. So most people would be living in the Eastern Hemisphere, where Asia is. 13 Africans, split on female, male. The majority would be non-white. The majority would be non-Christian. Most would be heterosexual. Only 6 people would possess 59% of the world's entire wealth, and all 6 would be from the United States. So we are the wealthiest nation by far. 14 would be unable to read. 80 people would not be access to to good housing. A third of those individuals would die from famine. 1 would be near death. 1 would be near birth. Only 7 would have a college education. 8 would own a computer, and that number might be larger, and 11 would be homosexual. So that is kind of interesting, I think. We think about the world in terms of our local context, what's around us, but just by the stats, that's what the world looks like. So, perceptions. Where do ideas about others come from? If we understand that the numbers might not always actually match up to how we feel or are raised to feel about the world. Throughout our life, our experiences teach us about about the world, and so we sometimes have this mistaken belief of thinking the world is just like ours. But we tend to be raised in groups just like us. We tend to gravitate towards similar people, and so we tend to be also uncomfortable with differences because we don't understand it. So we can see how that might lead to kind of the promotion of biases and stereotypes. Even though the world has a lot of difference, if we're only seeing people like us, we can tend to be afraid of other things, of other differences in the world. So I just want to say as a side note, I think traveling to other countries is one of the best things that you can do to gain an appreciation of diversity. All right. We also, like I said before, we tend to mistakenly believe that people like us on the surface are also similar to us. So it's like if I were to meet another white female with my education, who looked like me in some ways, I might think, oh, she's like me. But she could be totally different. Also, that people who are unlike us on the surface look really different are also different in other ways. A woman from India with a very different life background from me could be a lot more like me in personality and beliefs than someone who was raised in the similar places I am. And so we do have a tendency to view others through a lens of group stereotype. And I put this kind of graphic here. This is actually how a lot of people in the world see us. In the United States, we have a lot of stereotypes about people from around the world, and we maybe don't consider how they also see us. So how do you feel when people think that you're fat, you eat a lot of fast food, that you're all about country, you're all about the flag, America? That's not how I identify. Similarly, some of our beliefs about individuals who might be Muslim, or might be from the country of Africa, or might be from Russia. It's really hard to stereotypes don't often hold true. So, questions. Why do we need to understand how perceptions are formed? Well, as a helper, it's going to be really important for you to get that so that you can piece together your own perceptions. They're not all bad, they're not all good, they are what they are, and being aware of them means that you can make choices about them. If people respond well to you and appreciate your work, how do you feel? You tend to like that, don't you? We all tend to like that. But when others avoid us because of negative perceptions, how do we feel? Have you ever been treated unfairly? Someone had perceptions about you that weren't really based on the reality of who you are? That can kind of be pretty negative. So that's why, again, we really promote understanding diversity and understanding that people are different so that you can be with people for who they truly are and not easy stereotypes. Alright, now let's quickly break down the difference between prejudice, stereotype, and discrimination. So, a prejudice is a generalized attitude towards members of a group. That's less about what is believed, but the general feeling towards. So, for example, recent demonstrations in Charlottesville were about a group of people with an attitude of being against, being angry at, being hateful towards racial differences in our country. They were pro-white and believing that individuals who were not white, that there were a lot of different beliefs, so I don't want to just quickly, glibly summarize it, but generally unhappy, unhelpful, negative attitudes. Whereas a stereotype is a belief about members of a group. So, for example, there are sometimes beliefs about the poor, that they are lazier than people who have means. And studies have actually proven that that's not the case, that oftentimes the poor are actually angrier because they have less access to resources. There's no evidence to show that they are actually lazier than people who have more wealth. So that is a stereotype. And so discrimination are those behaviors directed towards people on the basis of their group membership. So deciding that because someone is from another country that they are not good or kind or can't be trusted, or because someone is disabled that they are not able to understand something. There are a lot of different ways that we can discriminate, and it can sometimes be very subtle. So I just encourage you to kind of think about the difference. Let's move on. So let's talk about labeling. So labels tend to be these stereotypes that kind of come along that we have as cultures kind of given to other cultures. So this image, it relates to some different ideas about women. Of course, this is a white woman, so there are even sometimes more labels for women of color, which is not fair. But regardless, the point is that categorizing can be dangerous, and that when we make labels of someone based on what we see, that's really the case. Labels can become really rigid, and then there's no room for growth, and you don't see someone for who they really are. That can be limiting for both the individuals and for the category of itself. For example, if we think that all women in leadership are bitches, that can often happen. A woman can assert herself and she could be considered a bitch, whereas if it were a male, he was just being a good leader. Thinking that someone who's blonde is dumb, that someone, because they enjoy dating a lot of people, is a bimbo or a slut. These are very unhelpful labels that really describe a person. And of course, there are these labels for all groups of people, privileged or oppressed. These labels, there are labels for everyone, and they're not always helpful. And again, this leads to stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. So, where do these come from? Again, social learning. We tend to learn our negative stereotypes from the people around us, the people that raise us, or groups that we're in, or friends that we make. So we can learn these things, but also some from threats. So, for example, if I had experiences in my childhood, which I did, with an American Native man who was very threatening and violent towards my family, if I were to be around another man who looked like him with his same background, it could be possible that I could kind of have this internal kind of reaction. So it's important for me to understand that not everyone who is of the same group as him and looks like him would act that way. Now, thankfully, I know that, but there could be other situations where people really struggle to make that separation. I had the benefit of knowing that person well, so I could identify this was him. But say you were just kind of out in public and you were suddenly threatened by someone that looked a certain way. Without knowing them, you might think that everyone who looks like them is threatening or bad. So that's a good thing to kind of be aware of. We often are prejudiced of what we're afraid of. So either we don't understand them or we've had a negative experience with someone from that group. Is being prejudiced against one group the same as being prejudiced against another group? For example, are individuals who have prejudices against women and people who identify as gay, do they have those prejudices for the same reasons? No. Just like diversity is complex, the reason that people hold prejudices is very complex and often really personal and hard to identify and understand. So again, trying to be aware of ourselves and mindful of ourselves can be really helpful in understanding our own prejudices because our reasons are different. Just think about, the impact of having prejudices and stereotypes. Think about how people feel when they're excluded. I think we've all had times in our life where we felt excluded. When we're excluded, just based on our own kind of no real good reason, but just kind of some part of our culture, we feel less interested in performing to full capacity. We don't feel good about ourselves. We feel shame. We start to believe those messages that we can't fit in. I know I certainly grew up very poor, and so I used to feel like I was trash because of it, because students made me feel that way. And it took a long time for me to get confidence to realize that's not the case and that I have a lot to offer in school. And then I became a good student eventually. But I did struggle in my performance because of that. And low self-esteem. The fact is that humans do not flourish when they feel shame and low self-esteem. Shame is a really tricky mindset, and it can be very limiting. Whereas when we're accepted and appreciated, we feel positive, we're more productive. Studies show this can help in the workplace. It helps us be stronger students. So again, wanting to extend that unconditional positive regard that we've talked about can make a huge difference for a client and can actually help them be more aware of themselves and be more well in their daily life. So how do we get there? How do we appreciate others and then communicate that acceptance? This is tricky. We want to become more aware of diversity, but like it says in the book, you also don't want to assume that just because someone comes to see you that what they need from you is to talk about their diversity. I think the book gave example of something or similar to, someone going to counseling and maybe they identify as a gay male, but they're really there because they lost like a parent in the accident. They're not there to address being a gay male. They're there to address the fact that they suffered a loss. So it's important to kind of be open to diversity, but also not assume that diversity is the focus. It's just tricky stuff, people. The most we can do is just be present and try to learn what the person we're with is wanting and needing from us. But we can grow in cultural sensitivity, and that kind of involves a lot of different things. But just being open to learning, like I've said, being open and willing to learn and to be accepting is just a huge piece, and I also think a lot of fun. If we're aware of our biases, we can correct them. Knowing our own biases can also be a huge part of growing in cultural sensitivity. We all have them. I like this, as if we're driving a car that drifts to the right, we can steer left to go where we intend. It's a journey in becoming aware of your biases. I know that I was exposed to different types of people growing up, but there were still lots of groups I wasn't. I wasn't around, for example, a lot of people who identify as lesbian when I was growing up, and I had more conservative beliefs, I would say, when I was a bit younger, and I can still respect some conservative belief. But when I started as a resident director, I had a lot of female students who identified as lesbian, and so I had a big learning curve. And I'm not having assumptions about them. They were just people. But it was, I think, a really positive thing for me to be open to learn just about new cultures and also what were the difficulties they faced, what were the stereotypes that people held against them that had nothing to do with who they really were. So that's just one example of a different dimension of diversity that I had to learn about in my life, and that I was better for it. And talking about cultural sensitivity and being open to learning, just as a side note, I found that food is a wonderful way to learn about different cultures. I love to eat food, and I like to eat food from all over the world, and I think that can be a really wonderful entry way to learning about a culture because everyone likes to eat, and seeing how people cook is fun. So, I think we're getting close to wrapping up here. So, just remember that not only can we not judge a book by its cover, but we have to recognize that some books have had their covers torn off, some are written in a foreign language, and some might contain ideas with which we don't agree. And that's okay, but there are a lot of different books out there. Recognize, accommodate when you can, and value others for what they represent and what they have to offer. Be positive and proactive in this endeavor. That is about the most that we can ask from you as helpers. Just be open, be positive, be proactive in learning.
Can I walk away?
You can't understand it all, you can't fix it all, and that's okay, but an open attitude makes all the difference. Hope you enjoyed this module. There are a few more videos for you to watch, and good luck in preparing for your quiz. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.